The rain had been falling since midday, and by the time the rider appeared at the edge of the Shalford Road, it had settled into the kind of steady, purposeful downpour that does not intend to stop before morning. Cecily Ward heard the horse before she saw it, that particular rhythm of an animal pushed past comfort, now moving at its own pace, the rider's authority surrendered to the creature's weariness. She had been lighting the lamps in the yard of the Hare and Anchor, a task she performed herself because Bess was needed inside, and old Ferris's hands shook too badly in the cold to be trusted with flame near the stable hay. She held the lamp up, and the beam caught the horse first, a gray, mud-dark, to the flank, head low. Then the man. He was not large in the way that announced itself. He was simply present, tall in the saddle, broad through the shoulder, sitting very still for a man who had clearly ridden hard. His coat was dark and soaked through, and when he drew up at the gate his face was in shadow, the brim of his hat channeling a small river of water off its edge. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at the sign above the door, then at her. "Is there a room?" he said. It was not quite a question. "There is," she said. "One left." The coach from Winchester took the others. He dismounted without ceremony, passed the reins to Ferris, who had materialized from somewhere, and followed Cecily inside. In the entrance passage, he removed his hat and coat and hung them on the peg beside the door. He gave his name when she asked for it, Hartwell, no further detail, and she did not press. She was accustomed to men who did not elaborate on the Portsmouth road. She showed him to the room and left to bring water and whatever remained from the evening's joint. When she returned and knocked, he opened the door. Still in his waistcoat, his coat not yet dry enough to be worth resuming. It was as she turned in the passage after he had taken the tray from her, and the door had almost closed, that she saw it. His coat hung on the hook inside the room, and from the breast pocket displaced by the damp something had slipped half out and now dangled at the edge of falling, a ring on a ribbon, small, dark metal. The face of it incised with a pattern she could not see from this distance. She did not say anything. She was already moving back down the passage when she heard the soft click of the door pulling shut. She was at the foot of the stairs when she stopped. She went back up. She knocked again. He opened the door with the same lack of ceremony, the same stillness. "Your coat," she said, and extended her hand. The ring sat in her palm, on its ribbon, where she had caught it at the bottom of the peg, not 4 seconds after she had passed the door. It fell. He looked at it for a moment in her palm, not at her. Then he took it and said quietly, "Thank you, Miss Ward." She had not told him her name. She noticed this later, when she was downstairs making up the ledger. She did not go back to ask how he knew it. Some things you file away and examine in the morning. The Hare and Anchor had been Thomas Ward's house for 30 years, before it became Cecily's problem. Her father had not been a wealthy man, but he had been a careful one, and the inn had kept the family in a modest particular dignity with good linen, a modest library behind the parlor door. Cecily's education managed by the curate in exchange for a winter's worth of good dinners. When Thomas Ward died in the autumn of 1812, Cecily had been 22. Her mother long since gone, her brother James somewhere in the peninsula with the 52nd. The inn had passed to her in practice, if not in full legal standing, and the debt attached to it had passed as well. The debt was Drummond's, Mr. Drott. Gideon Drummond held the mortgage note her father had signed 8 years before, for the repairs to the stable block and the enlargement of the kitchen, £240 at 5%. A manageable obligation when her father was healthy and the road was busy. Drummond called on the first of every month, drank 1 glass of her father's port from the stock she had not had the heart to sell, and reminded Cecily in a voice of meticulous courtesy that she had until the following November to pay the note in full or transfer the property. He had twice remarked, with the expression of a man making a generous offer, that he would consider a settlement if she chose to relinquish the license and find a more suitable situation for a woman of her station. She had twice told him, in terms she kept level, that she intended to meet the note. Drummond was not a man who frightened her. He was a man who reduced her. There was a distinction. To the village she was Cecily, who ran a good house, and was known to be sensible. To the county set, to the magistrate's wife, to the families whose carriages changed horses in her yard without the family descending, she was, if she featured at all, the innkeeper's daughter. The category was not cruel, not precisely, it simply foreclosed. Here was the ceiling, and it is exactly where you were standing. She had learned not to press her head against it. The morning after Hartwell's arrival brought a fresh problem. Ferris found the gray gelding favoring its right foreleg before 7 o'clock. Not badly, but badly enough that moving it on the road would have been unkind. Cecily sent Bess up with the news, with an apology already composed in her mind, a list of the alternatives, another horse hired from the posting stable in Farnham, the coach at 11 if he preferred speed to comfort. When Bess came back down, she reported that the gentleman had said he would stay if the room was available until the horse was right. He had said it, Bess added, with the faintly impressed tone she reserved for men who were sparing with words, like it was nothing at all. So he stayed. He did not behave like a man accustomed to inns. He rose early, and came down quietly and sat in the corner of the public room with whatever book he had produced from his saddlebag, and he watched things. He watched the fire when it needed tending and attended to it himself, before Cecily could get to it. He watched the road through the window. He watched Cecily, though never when she was looking directly at him, and she was careful not to let on that she had noticed. On the second day, Drummond arrived. He came alone, without his clerk, which was unusual. He stepped into the parlor where Cecily was doing the accounts, and stood at the desk with his hat in his hands, and his eyes moving over the columns with an expression that managed to suggest both polite lack of interest and a thorough reading. He had, he said, been in the county on other business. He had thought he might stop. He understood that there was a gentleman in residence, a Mr. Hartwell. Was that correct? Did she know anything about him? Cecily said she knew he was a traveler whose horse had gone lame, and who was waiting for it to recover. Drummond nodded. His eyes stayed on the ledger. I wonder, he said after a pause that he allowed to be slightly too long, that a woman in your position takes in single gentlemen without references. One can never be certain of the class of person on the Portsmouth Road. My father kept this house for 30 years, on the same principle, Cecily said. A traveler in need of a room is a traveler in need of a room. Drummond's smile did not quite reach his eyes. Quite, he said. Well, the 1st of December comes. I trust you are making progress. He left. Cecily did not watch him go because the accounts genuinely required her attention, but she heard the door, and counted the seconds after it before she permitted herself to release the breath she had been holding. She did not hear Hartwell until he spoke, which meant he had been standing in the passage for some portion of that exchange. Is that the man who holds the mortgage? He said from the doorway. She turned. He was holding his book, a finger marking the page. His expression was the same one she had come to recognize from the fire tending and the road watching, entirely level, giving nothing away, and yet somehow engaged in a way that was not casual. You have good ears, she said. Walls are thin at coaching inns, he said. I did not intend to listen. She believed him. Yes, that is Mr. Drummond. He looked at the door Drummond had exited through for a moment. How much? He said. That is not your concern, Mr. Hartwell. No, he said. It is not. He went back to his book. He had asked. She filed that away with the other thing, the name he had known without being told, and did not examine either until later. It was the following afternoon that she found out what he was, in the sense that mattered more than his name. She had gone to the stable to check on the gray, and found Hartwell there ahead of her, crouching beside the gelding's foreleg, with a competence that suggested he had done this many times. Bess was at the stable door with a bucket, talking about nothing in the particular way she had when she was nervous, and when Drummond's clerk, Mr. Norris, a pinched young man who had arrived that morning and taken a seat in the public room without ordering anything, appeared at the stable-yard gate. Bess went quiet. Norris said he had a message for Miss Ward. He said it with the air of a man delivering something of more weight than the words warranted. The message was that Mr. Tree. Drummond wished Cecily to know that he had reviewed the terms of the mortgage note, and believed there to be an error in the running total of interest accrued, one that was not in her favor, and that he intended to discuss the revised figure at his December call. Cecily looked at Norris. "Tell Mr. Drummond I will require the revised figures in writing, witnessed by a solicitor who is not himself." Norris blinked. He had not expected that. He wrote something in a small notebook, then looked up. "Mr. Spur." Drummond also asks whether the current guest intends a long stay. He hesitated. "He said to tell you as a matter of courtesy. He said, the gentlemen who stay at inns without announcement and without servants are not always what they seem." The notebook consulted for the exact phrase. Norris continued, "A young woman of limited experience and no family connections of consequence, an innkeeper's daughter." His words, Miss Ward. "He thought you should be reminded of the distinction." The stable was quiet for a moment. Then Hartwell, who had not moved from his position beside the gray, said, without raising his voice, "Tell Mr. Byron." Drummond. "I am well acquainted with the distinction." He stood, brushing hay from his knee. "And tell him I should like to discuss a matter of property with him at his earliest convenience, a matter regarding the Veyford estate." Norris went very still. His notebook closed. Something passed across Hartwell's face, not triumph and not warning. Something more measured than either. He looked at Norris the way one looks at a door one has just correctly identified as unlocked. Norris left. Cecily looked at Hartwell. "The Veyford estate," she said. "Yes." Drummond had been the late Baron Veyford's secretary. "I remember. Now my father mentioned it once. He said Drummond had come into the county with money from a great house, and no one quite knew how." "No," Hartwell said. "They did not." She looked at him a long time. He met her eyes steadily. "Who are you?" she said, and this time it was not a question that permitted a surname only. He was quiet for a moment. "Edward Hartwell, Viscount Stern. The late Baron Veyford was my father." The lamp in the parlor that evening burned lower than Cecily meant to let it. She had brought him tea. She did not intend to share, and then found herself sitting across the table with her own cup, because the conversation required it, required specifically that she remain in the room for longer than the act of setting down a tray. He told her about his father carefully. Not quickly, not with the fluency of a man who had rehearsed the telling, but slowly and in sequence, the way a man reconstructs something he has gone over many times alone and still does not fully trust himself to organize. The Baron Veyford had died in the winter of 1811 with a reputation the county had arranged around him like a verdict. A man who had gambled his estate to ruin and left his son a title without the means to sustain it. It was what everyone said. It was what the creditors had said, what the solicitors had said. Drummond had presented the ledgers. The ledgers had said so plainly. "I was in Portugal when my father died," Hartwell said. He held his cup, but did not drink from it. "I came back 8 months after. The estate was being wound up. Drummond was the executor. Everything had been organized in my absence." He paused. "My father did not gamble. He refused a hand of cards, on principle. I know men say that sort of thing when the ledgers tell a different story, but I knew him." "What did you do?" Cecily asked. "I took the ledgers, and I looked at them until I understood them." A pause. "Then I found a man who understood them better, and paid him to look. It took 2 years. The entries are clever, the kind of clever that passes for solid until you look at them across the full 5-year period. Drummond had been moving money out of the estate accounts in small amounts, different payees, different months. The total, over 5 years, was more than £4,000. 4,000 pounds. Cecily thought of 240. "The signet ring," she said. He reached into his coat pocket. The coat dried finally, and hung by the hearth for a day, and set the ring on the table between them. She had not seen it clearly in the passage, a heavy, dark oval, the face carved with a coat of arms she could not read upside down. The ribbon still threaded through it. He did not pick it up again. He looked at it. "My father wore it every day of his life," he said. "He was buried without it. The household thought it had been lost in the confusion of the death. It was not lost." He was quiet for a moment. "Drummond took it from his hand the night he died. A servant who was present told me. But she did not tell anyone at the time because she was old and frightened, and Drummond had the keys to everything. And you recovered it 3 weeks ago from a pawnbroker in Guildford who had taken it from a man matching Drummond's description 18 months after my father's death. He had not yet sold it. It was too distinctive. He touched the edge of the ring without lifting it. I traced Drummond to this county through the pawnbroker's records. I knew he had settled somewhere near the Portsmouth Road." He looked up at her. "I did not know about your inn or about your mortgage until I read the name on your sign and your father's name in the ledger your father's creditor had filed with the county court. Drummond used money from the Veyford estate to begin his lending operation here." The fire shifted in the grate. She was not, in that moment, angry at him. She did not think she was. She was something quieter and more difficult to name, a feeling she recognized from the day after her father died when she had stood in the inn's kitchen at 4 a.m. and understood with a flat, complete clarity exactly what was required of her. The world had presented itself in full, and she was the only one present to look at it. "You should have told me," she said. "I know," he said, "when you arrived." "Yes, or the morning after." He did not defend the delay. He accepted it in the same way he accepted the weather, without remark, without excuse. She found that she respected this and was simultaneously frustrated by it. "You could have told me his name meant something to you, and I could have told you everything I know about him," she said. "I could have told you that his clerk Norris comes once a month to read the yard count, and that he keeps a room at the Black Horse in Farnham. I could have told you that the solicitor he works with, Mr. Bree, Quill's office in Godalming, handled the letters of extension on this note with peculiarities I did not understand at the time. I did not know whether you could be trusted," he said. The word landed without malice. She looked at him. "And now," she said. "Now I know you refused a direct offer from him to surrender the license, and that you have been running this house for 2 years on principle rather than comfort," he said. "I know you corrected the terms before I could, and I know what you did this afternoon." He looked at his cup. "You told Norris to tell Drummond to put the figures in writing and have them witnessed. No one has done that. No one has made him produce the paper." "I am an innkeeper's daughter," she said. The phrase came out flat. "He told me himself, through Norris. I am a young woman of limited experience and no family connections of consequence. Perhaps he is right that I do not know what I am doing." "He is not right," Hartwell said. He said it without emphasis, without decoration. The way he said it left no room for argument, not because he raised his voice, but because the sentence itself was simply true, delivered by a man who did not traffic in comfort. She said nothing. The fire shifted again. If you have found yourself before listening to this story, wondering how a woman holds a thing like this together, the grief and the debt and the daily face of it, then you know something of what she was. Leave a thought in the comments if you do. She would not have wanted your pity. She would have wanted, I think, simply to be seen. She rose and cleared the cups and said good night. She did not sleep for a long time. It was Bess who told her. Bess, whose eyes were sharp, and whose ears were sharper, and who had a gift for putting together what she overheard while carrying trays, came to Cecily the following morning with the particular expression of someone delivering intelligence they have been debating all night, whether to share sting na. She had heard Norris. She said in the yard, speaking to Drummond's man who had come from Farnham with a letter. The word she had heard was stern. And then, lordship. Cecily stood with the morning's bread still in her hands and understood. He had not told her he was Lord Stern. He had told her Hartwell. And then, when pressed, Viscount Stern. But she had taken in the name as part of the context, part of the explanation. She had not. She realized, had space in the moment, to think about what it meant in relation to herself. He was a viscount. He was the son of a baron. He had been in her parlor drinking her tea, and he had come to the Hare and Anchor because Drummond was here and she was— What was she to the story he was telling? She was the innkeeper who held the mortgage that Drummond had funded with stolen money. She was convenient. She was local. She was someone who knew the county and the road and could not move him along without explaining why, and whose inn made perfect, unobtrusive cover for a man who needed to watch someone. She set the bread down. She went up the stairs. He opened the door. He read her face in the first second, and did not pretend he had not. "How long did you intend to stay," she said, "before you decided I was useful enough to tell the truth to?" "That is not what happened. You stayed because your horse was lame. The horse has been walking the yard for 2 days. You could have left yesterday." He was quiet. "Tell me." "I am wrong," she said. "Tell me you did not choose this house. Because it was convenient, and that you did not find me useful, and that your trust, when you gave it, was not another form of calculation." "You are not wrong that I stayed for reasons beyond the horse," he said. "You are wrong that those reasons were calculation. Norris told me today, through Bess, through a letter from Drummond's man. He told her I am an innkeeper's daughter. She heard the phrase as she said it, and was surprised by the cleanness of the pain it still carried, even now, even after she had spent a fortnight keeping it at arm's length. Mr. Drummond seems to believe that is sufficient explanation for any confusion I might have about my own situation. I am beginning to think he may not be entirely wrong." He said her name, Cecily. It was the first time he had used it, and he knew it. She saw that he knew it, the care with which it arrived. "Please leave by tomorrow," she said. "I will have Ferris prepare the gray." She went back downstairs. She did not look at her face in the passage glass. The notice arrived the following morning by courier from the court at Godalming, a formal legal summons requiring the presence of Mr. Braw, Gideon Drummond, his accounts, and any parties with material knowledge of the Veyford estate's disbursements over the period from 1806 to 1811, at a hearing to be convened at the Hare and Anchor Inn, Shalford, in the private dining room, before Mr. Dinn, Quill as officer of the court, on the 14th of November in the year 1813. Cecily read it twice, standing in the hall with the courier's horse still blowing in the yard. The hearing was not Drummond's. It was Hartwell's. She had not known he had already filed the petition. He had told her about his father, about the ledgers, about the ring, and he had not mentioned that the legal machinery had already been set in motion, that the wheels of it had turned 3 days before he knocked on her door in the rain. She thought about this and found that she was not certain what it meant. He had not used the hearing as a lever to explain himself. He had not told her about it even when she had accused him of calculation. He had, as best she could reconstruct, set the legal mechanism in motion, and then come to do the final work himself. And the final work had brought him to her door, and what happened afterward had happened. She did not know what to do with this. Drummond arrived that afternoon with Norris and a third man she did not recognize, a solicitor of Drummond's own engaging, who had the compressed, combative look of a man hired specifically to disagree with everything. Lady Osworth arrived shortly after. She was the magistrate's wife, a woman of formidable social confidence and limited practical patience, who had been copied on the summons as a courtesy to her husband, who was unwell, and who had taken this as an invitation to attend in his place. She occupied the best chair in the dining room, with the decisive air of someone who has decided in advance that the proceedings will reflect well on her judgment. Cecily, when she entered to set the room, was told by Lady Osworth to ask someone else to see to the chairs. "Someone appropriate," Lady Osworth said. "I should like to speak to you about what the court has asked of you, Miss Ward. I am not certain you understand the scope of what you have been drawn into." "I understand it well enough," Cecily said. She moved the chairs herself. "My dear," Lady Osworth said, with the particular patience of a woman who has revised her tone downward, "you are being asked to provide testimony in a matter involving a viscount in a baronial estate, and what may well be criminal proceedings. I do not say this unkindly. I say it because I think you may not have anyone else to say it, And this is not a matter for the innkeeper's daughter, Mr. D. Drummond has told me that you have been drawn in by a man who has used your establishment as a base of operations, and who has likely told you a young woman without connections whatever served his purpose. Cecily set the last chair in place. She looked at Lady Osworth with the same expression she used for the monthly visit. Level, unhurried, clear. Mr. Drummond has been very industrious in sharing that perspective, she said. I wonder if your ladyship might wait to hear the proceedings before forming her conclusions. Lady Osworth blinked. She was not accustomed to that register from women in aprons. Hartwell came in then, and the room changed, not noisily. Simply the way a room changes when someone enters it who has decided what he intends to do. He acknowledged Lady Osworth with a courteous bow. He acknowledged Drummond with nothing at all. He set his case on the table, opened it, and removed 4 items: a set of bound ledger pages, a document of attestation from the Guildford pawnbroker, a signed statement from the household servant, and the ring on its ribbon. He set the ring down beside the ledgers, and did not explain it. Yet Mr. Quill entered, settled his papers, looked over the assembly with the expression of a man who has done this many times, and is not surprised by any of it, and called the hearing to order. Hartwell presented his evidence in the same way he said everything plainly, in sequence, without embellishment. The ledger forgeries, the dispersal of funds, the dates, the amounts, the total, the account at the bank in Guildford, where the funds had been received, the account belonging to an entity that could be traced by way of 2 intermediary firms and a great deal of methodical record-keeping to Drummond's own name. He cited each document as he placed it before Quill. Quill read without interruption. Drummond's solicitor objected. 3 times. Each objection was overruled in the same flat procedural tone. Then Quill asked about the ring. The Veyford family signet, Hartwell said. My father's removed from his person on the night of his death, and pawned in Guildford 18 months later by a man identified by the pawnbroker as matching Mr. Drummond's description. He produced the pawnbroker's attestation. The pawnbroker held it unsold because it was too singular a piece to sell without inquiry. I recovered it 3 weeks ago. Quill looked at the ring. Drummond said that the ring had come into his possession through entirely legitimate means, that the late Baron had given it to him as a token of personal regard, and that the suggestions being advanced here were the product of a young man's grief and a young man's unwillingness to accept that his father had made very poor decisions. Quill said, Was anyone else present at the time of the late Baron's death, Mr. Drummond? A pause. Various household staff. One of them, Quill said, consulting Hartwell's attestation, provides a signed statement to the contrary. Drummond's solicitor objected. Quill set aside the objection without looking up. Then Quill said, Lord Stern, you have listed as a material witness a Miss Cecily Ward of this establishment. What is the nature of her testimony? Drummond said, before Hartwell could answer, that Miss Ward had no material connection to the proceedings, that she was a young woman who had been imposed upon by a man with a particular interest in making use of her, that she was, whatever her personal qualities, not a party whose testimony would carry weight in the matter under review. She is an innkeeper's daughter, he said with the precision of a man who has used the phrase before and found it reliable, and she has been told a great deal by a man with reasons to tell it. Hartwell looked at Drummond for a moment. He had not, Cecily noticed, looked at her since entering the room. He had not needed to. He had known where she was. He looked now at Quill. She is not a witness, he said. She is the reason I came. The room was very quiet. Miss Ward's mortgage note was financed by funds disbursed from the Veyford estate accounts in 1809, Hartwell said, still addressing Quill. The amount, £240, corresponds precisely to a withdrawal logged in the Veyford ledger under a fictitious estate improvement. The money passed through Drummond's intermediate account before appearing as the origin of this inn's note. Miss Ward has been paying interest on stolen money. Every payment she has made to Drummond is recoverable. He paused. I would ask the court to attach the note and place it under review pending full accounting. Lady Osworth was very still. Drummond's solicitor rose. Quill raised one hand, and the solicitor sat. Quill looked at the ring on the table for a moment. He looked at Drummond. He said, in the unhurried voice of a man who has already made up his mind, "I am going to require you to remain in the county, Mr. Drummond, pending further inquiry. Your accounts are to be produced to this court in full within 10 days. He looked at Drummond's solicitor. That includes the mortgage notes and all related correspondence. Drummond's face was the face of a man whose script had, for the first time in his life, encountered a room where it did not work. He said nothing. Lady Osworth, in the silence that followed, turned her head and looked at Cecily with an expression that had something new in it, something that was not hostility and not warmth, but the particular quality of a woman recalibrating a category she had considered fixed. Cecily looked back at her calmly. She did not help Lady Osworth with the recalibration. The room cleared slowly. Quill departed with his papers and Drummond's accounts under his arm, and Drummond at his side. The solicitor followed, saying something into Drummond's ear that Drummond did not appear to be hearing. Lady Osworth departed last, pausing at the door, long enough to tell Cecily, a concession rather than an apology, that she was clearly a young person of more capability than first appeared, and that if Cecily needed an introduction to her husband's solicitor, she was not unwilling to arrange one. Then she left. Bess appeared from somewhere. Because Bess always appeared when something was over, and began removing the remaining cups from the table. Hardwell did not leave. He stood at the window looking out at the November yard. His case was closed on the table. The ledger's back inside it. The ring was still on the table where Quill had left it after his examination. Cecily crossed to the table and looked at it. "The phrasing you used," she said. "She is the reason I came." "It is the truth," he said, still looking out the window. "When I traced the money to this county and found the note attached to this establishment, I understood what he had done with it. I came to confirm the origin of the funds. I needed someone who had handled the note, who had the payment records, who knew Drummond's business in this district. I needed you before I needed anything else." "You could have told me that the first night," she said. "I could have," he said. He turned from the window. "I did not. I thought about it. Then you returned the ring, and I thought about the kind of person who returns something without being asked, and without saying they have done so, and I decided I needed to know more about you before I asked anything of you. And in the days between." "In the days between," he said, "I found out. The fire in the grate had been burning all morning, and the room was warm. The yard was quiet. Cecily could hear Ferris with the horse somewhere to the left." She picked up the ring. It was heavier than it looked, which rings of that sort tended to be. Solid, the metal worked smooth with years of wear, and then years of ribbon, rather than skin. She turned it over. The arms were simple, a device she did not recognize but that was clearly old, the lines of it worn at the edges from use. "He never wore it on the ribbon," Hartwell said, "only on his hand." He was watching her. "I have been carrying it on the ribbon because I could not bring myself to wear it until the matter was settled." She held it out to him. He took it. For a moment he held it as she had, looking at it. Then he threaded the ribbon off the ring, folded the ribbon twice and set it aside, and put the ring on the fourth finger of his right hand. He looked at it there. She thought of her father's hands, the way a working man's hands look when they are finally still. "You were right that I should have told you sooner," he said. "I owe you that acknowledgement." "You owe me the acknowledgement," she agreed. "I will take it." A pause. "I intend to petition the court to void the mortgage note entirely," he said. "The transfer of estate funds to Drummond's personal use predates every element of your father's transaction. The note is not valid. The inn is yours without encumbrance." He paused again. "I could have a solicitor write to you with the details." "You could," she said. He said nothing more for a moment. The word could sat between them, doing the work that longer sentences often fumble. "Or," he said, "I could come back when the petition is complete and tell you myself." She looked at him. The ring on his hand. The light from the window on his face, which was not the same face it had been that first rainy night at the gate. Or perhaps it was exactly the same face, and she was simply looking at it differently now. "You could," she said. She left the ring's ribbon on the table and went to see about the midday bread. He did come back. He came back in the first week of December with a court's confirmation. And without announcement, no more ceremony than the first time. A horse in the yard, a knock at the door, Cecily opening it to the same November face, now December. He did not stay the way a man stays at an inn. He stayed the way a man stays when an inn is no longer the category that applies. He came back 3 times in December and twice in January. And by February, the village had formed its opinion, which was that Lord Stern was a man of sense, if unusual habits. Lady Orsworth called in the 3rd week of February, ostensibly to deliver a message from her husband about parish business, and stayed for tea and addressed Cecily as Miss Ward in a tone that had nothing remaining of the category she had used before. The Hare and Anchors stayed open. The debt was gone. Bess, who missed nothing, began setting the corner table by the fire as a matter of habit. The ring had been on Hartwell's hand since November, and Cecily had not touched it again, but she noticed it every time. She noticed everything about him with the particular attention of a woman who has trained herself to keep her head down, and found that the training was failing at its work. On an afternoon in early March, with the yard full of returning birds and the first suggestion of warmth in the light, he was in the parlor reading, and she was at the desk, and neither of them was saying anything. Because nothing was required and the silence was of the good variety, settled and easy and aware of itself. "Cecily," he said without looking up from his book. "Yes," she said. "I would like to ask you something." "Yes," she said. He looked up then. The fire was behind him, and the window light was on his face. And she thought with a clarity that startled her, that she had been watching him since November, and that she was not going to stop. "Stay close," he said. And this time it was not quite a command, and not quite a question, and she understood that it never had been only one thing. She set down her pen. She looked at him across the room. Outside, the March road was drying. The sign above the door moved in the first warm wind of the season. The Hare and the Anchor, and the painted letters spelling out her father's name, which was also hers. She had been the innkeeper's daughter for long enough. She was ready now to be known as something else by the man who had known it first. On a ribbon dark November night, with the rain still on his coat, when she had put a ring in his hand and not said a word about it, and he had called her by her name. "Thank you for keeping company with Cecily, all the way to the end if her quiet courage moved you. Leave a word in the comments. It means more than you know." The ring was on his hand. The parlor was warm. Outside, the first birds of March called across the Shalford yard, indifferent to rank and category, belonging only to the morning. That was enough,